Welcome back to the Spicy Take Sports Podcast. I'm Elijah, and we actually have not just a normal gang today. We also have Michael from the Spaghetti Junction boys, and obviously we got Colton and Caleb. How are y'all doing tonight?
Good.
Yeah, doing well. Have me on.
Happy to have you. Ready to talk some college ball.
Do
it. Fun season.
Do you want to go ahead and introduce some of your stuff, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm one of the hosts on the Spaghetti Junction Boys podcast. It's a pretty lighthearted podcast. We try and find some of the cracks within sports. Try to have some fun with it. Also do a lot of gambling picks on there. Not a ton of gambling winners, but just fade us. It tends to work out in the long run for you. Had some good guests on. Had Danny Werfel, Charlie Ward, couple Heisman Trophy winners. Michael the Burner Turner is a regular guest of ours. So awesome. Have a lot of fun over there. So come on, give us a listen sometime. After, of course, you listen to Spicy Takes.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Well,
Charlie Ward.
Yeah, we had Charlie. Charlie's a great guy. I kept trying to get him to tell us a little bit more about Pat Riley's suits and Pat Riley's hair, but he gave up nothing. And as a follically challenged man, I asked Danny Werfel, I said, when's it time, as Scott Van Pelt says, to come home, to just shave it all off? He's been bald for years. And he gave me a lot of advice that I took to heart. So one day I'll follow that.
That's definitely neat.
It's fantastic. But, well, let's go ahead and just get into it tonight. We got the college football podcast coming into the last few weeks, going into week 12. Obviously, the playoff is starting to ramp up. The top 7 did not change from last week. So still Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, Ohio State, Cincinnati, Michigan, then Michigan State. But then you had a couple changes at the bottom of the top 10 with Notre Dame, then Oklahoma State, then Wake Forest. So going into the last few weeks, and obviously different teams have a little bit tougher schedules than others. I'll go ahead and start with Michael. Who would you say is your projection for the Final Four?
Of course, starting at number 1, I don't see anyone stopping Georgia. This could come back to bite me. And, Georgia, every one of their rivals have won a national title since Georgia has last won a title. Even Georgia Tech has. But this defense is just terrifying. And so I don't see anyone getting in the way of that. I do think the first close game that they get since Clemson is Alabama. And I just think because you're not going to have a ton of contenders once the jumbled mess sorts itself out at the end of the year, that Alabama will also get in there. They'd want to put them at 4, but I'm going to guess they're going to put them at 3 just so they don't get an immediate rematch. My 2, I'm going to take the Buckeyes. I know that they have a gauntlet coming up. They've got Michigan State, then Michigan, and then likely Wisconsin right after that. And that's a brutal stretch. They haven't really beaten anyone of substance. Yeah, they beat Purdue. They beat Penn State. The Penn State game was a bit of a struggle, but their offense is really, really clicking. They're so efficient there. And until I know that Ohio State's not able to beat Michigan, I'm going to say that they're going to beat Michigan. So give me Ohio State at 2. And then the madness ensues. I don't see Cincinnati getting the 4 spot. Part of me thinks even if they run the table, that committee's not going to let them come to their party. But they also have really played with fire. Their last few games, they beat Navy by 1 score. They struggled with Tulsa, beat them by 1 score. Tulane was giving them fits. There was one other game in there where they were struggling a bit. And so now you saw that with Oklahoma. Oklahoma played with fire all year, and then they finally got bit by Baylor. They've got SMU this week, and then they likely have a really good Houston team in that title game. Either of those teams can beat them. And so I don't think Cincinnati's going to get in one way or the other. And what's going to really bite the Cincinnati fans is I think Notre Dame sneaks in. I think Notre Dame sneaks in almost by default. If not Notre Dame, I think that 5 spot's going to be Oklahoma State. Their defense is really good. They're one of the 5 best defenses in the country. Offense is kind of coming along. And so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Notre Dame, with Oklahoma State right on the periphery.
Would be golden.
So my top four is a little questionable. So obviously number one I think is Georgia. I mean, being a Georgia fan, I've been very trying not to be biased this whole year until they actually played a really high powered offense. I know it's Tennessee, but their offense is top 10 in the country, I believe. And I think with that defense, they can stay healthy. And if JT Daniels is starting quarterback, Georgia will be in the playoff. I think they'll win the playoff regardless. I mean, if they lose to Bama or not. So I have Georgia number one. I have Georgia beating Alabama in a close game. Part of me wants to put Bama on that fourth spot because it is Alabama, and I believe they're likely the second or third best team in the country. But if it's a blowout, then I don't see Alabama getting it. I see number two, I see Ohio State right on the table. I agree with Michael. I have the same two. I agree. I think Ohio State's going to beat Michigan State. It's at the shoe. It's just a hard place to play. I know Oregon won earlier in the year, but I think Ohio State's more gelled now as a team. So I'm not really convinced that Michigan State's going to go in there and beat them. I mean, yeah, they usually have a sound defense, and they have who I think is the Heisman front runner. We'll get that later, but there's a reason why I mentioned that. But yeah, Buckeyes at two. Number three, it's a little questionable. I think they may, if they can get past Oklahoma, I think they may have a great shot because they only have one loss. Is the Pokes, Oklahoma State. I think Oklahoma State's going to sneak in. I mean, it's crazy, and this may bite me in the tail completely in the next couple weeks. Yeah, but I have Oklahoma State going in. I mean, it's kind of a wild card, and my fourth is actually Notre Dame. I agree with Michael. I think they're going to sneak in. I was watching another podcast the other day. I think it was maybe Aaron Murray's podcast. I can't remember who I was watching, but they were talking about Notre Dame, and they're eighth in the country. Eighth.
Yeah.
I believe they're eighth right now, eighth or ninth. But
six and AP, eight and
yeah, Big Ten beats each other up. I mean, Georgia knocks off Bama. If a couple other teams lose, Oregon loses to Utah. I mean, you never know. Complete chaos. Cincinnati will, I think they'll lose to SMU or they'll lose to Houston, like Michael was saying. But so that's my four: Georgia, Ohio State, Oklahoma State, and Notre Dame.
What about you, Caleb?
I mean, Georgia number one again. I mean, Michael probably don't know this because haven't been on the podcast, but I kind of come at it a little bit more from an NFL standpoint of things. I read a lot of it, focus kind of on the draft. I mean, that entire Georgia defense could probably be drafted and probably in the first 5 rounds. I mean, it's just insane how much talent they have. I think that's a very clear cut number one. Number two, I also think that Ohio State is going to beat Michigan State, and I think that they'll win their Big Ten championship. I was on the Michigan State train for a little bit. I think Michigan State is more impressive than people are giving them credit for. They're kind of like acting like they're overranked right now, I think. But I mean, you can't underestimate a team that has, a possible Heisman candidate who's running for, close to 150, 200 yards a game almost every single time, and even against top defenses. So I think Ohio State gets a really impressive win over Michigan State. They'll get up to number two. Number three, this is where I get a little bit crazy. I'm going to keep Cincinnati at number three. I do think that they kind of regain their form. I think Ritter's too good to kind of keep playing with those games. And I think, from what I read, there was some issues with like the run defense in Cincinnati the last couple of weeks, but that pass defense is so solid. I mean, they have 2 draftable corners. And I think that they could just need to get a couple issues sorted out, and they should kind of be able to waltz in there if they're just careful about it, along with Houston. Houston is the big kind of challenge on that schedule. And then number 4, I'm going to go with Notre Dame over Oregon. I think Oregon ends up 5. But I'll take Notre Dame both because of name recognition, and I think that defense has steadily improved all year long. I don't really trust the offense, but I think they'll sneak in there.
Yeah, I think they're probably going to weasel their way in. It's kind of looking like that. One of those teams that, no one's paying attention to, and then there they are.
They don't really have a whole lot of noteworthy wins, though, either. I mean,
they just have – right now, it's probably one of the best losses at Cincinnati. I mean, not maybe kind of. I mean, because they lost at home by 11, so.
They lost to Cincinnati, but by virtue of me keeping Cincinnati at 3, I think I kind of have to put Notre Dame at number 4 then, because that would be their only loss. So I feel like it just follows, kind of tracks there.
Yeah, I'll come out of this. I kind of have two different top fours of what I'm hoping for versus what I think is actually happen. I personally want the most chaos possible. Like that's personally what I would love. I think that the most chaos possible would be if the Big Ten goes nuts and say Michigan State beats Ohio State, loses to Wisconsin, but Ohio State beats Michigan. You just sit here with all these 2-loss Big Ten teams. Like that would be one of my favorite things. But if I'm looking at it from what I actually think is going to happen, I think Georgia definitely is number one. I mean, I think that they're just another level from anyone else in the country. It's not even close. Like I haven't felt this way about a team since probably LSU a couple of years ago. And even then, you still thought they could possibly lose to an Alabama or something like that. I don't see that even happening. I think they beat Alabama by 3 touchdowns. And that's part of the reason I don't have Alabama in my top 4 either, because I think that they're going to get beat pretty handily by Georgia. And honestly, if you look at their wins, their best win is probably Ole Miss at that point. And I don't know if that can get you in over a few other teams. I agree that Ohio State's my number 2. I think Ohio State will win out. And I think CJ Stroud's going to probably win the Heisman at that point. I think that Ohio State's definitely the second best team in the country right now. I think the fact that the College Football Playoff Committee has Ohio State below Oregon is questionable, to be honest. If you're going to count that head-to-head from week 2, but you don't count Michigan State and Michigan's head-to-head from 2 weeks ago, I think that's a little bit contradictory. My number 3, I'm going to go Notre Dame as my number 3. I think that they're going to kind of sneak in there because I think Cincinnati does lose to SMU this week. I mean, SMU has been kind of inconsistent as of late, but Tanner Mordecai, if that offense is clicking, they can beat anyone. Like they can definitely score on that Cincinnati defense. If they've been struggling with Tulane, they can definitely struggle with SMU. And my number 4 will be Oklahoma State. I don't believe in Oklahoma, so I think Oklahoma State will beat them. And then at that point, I guess you would get Baylor in the conference championship game. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, because Baylor has a head-to-head over Oklahoma.
But that tiebreaker with the point differential is kind of weird, but so I'm not sure how that would work out. But I think that there'd be either one of those 2 teams. And a loss to Iowa State is not really too bad of a loss, to be honest. I mean, this is the same Iowa State team that was predicted top 10 in the country at the beginning of the year. So, I mean, I think Oklahoma State gets in, and I think that Oregon probably is the first team out because I think they lose to Utah once and beat them another time. But I just think you can't have that Stanford loss and make it to the playoff.
Especially because Stanford got beat by 45 points at home to Utah. 45. That's insane.
Didn't they have like less than, was it 50 or 100 yards of offense in the first half?
Yeah, it was along those lines, and that's embarrassing. That's
hilarious.
The 3rd ranked team in the country.
Yeah.
The total. Yeah, I don't see it. I don't see how Oregon's going to be in the top 4. I just feel like they'll probably lose again, honestly.
They have the best win in the country, but have been so ho-hum otherwise.
Exactly.
Arizona may be as bad as Vanderbilt, and they were in a ball game in the 4th quarter at home with the Wildcats. I don't get it.
I mean,
I don't understand Oregon.
I mean, Tulsa was a fumble at the goal line away from beating them, which is, I mean, versus beating Cincinnati, I should say. But yeah, you have Stanford beating Oregon at one point. Like, it's just, there's not any really great teams in the country this year, in my opinion, except for Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
But
I kind of agree. I mean, I have to, maybe it's just recency bias. I kind of have to I haven't been as impressed with Bama as usual, but Bama always comes on strong late in the season. So, we'll see. I don't think they're on Georgia's level. I don't think they'll lose by 3 touchdowns, though. I mean, I don't think in my predictions, I didn't put them in there, but I do think I think there's a decent likelihood that they end up getting there in the number 4. And then you see a rerun of the conference championship where you see number 1 Georgia versus number 4 Alabama all over again.
Like,
Like,
I think something you have to look at with that SEC title game is the committee doesn't always punish everyone the same. They obviously love Baylor, and Baylor dropped one spot for losing to a team in TCU who just fired their head coach. They lost to a bad TCU team who Oklahoma State then in turn beats by 30. And they said, oh, we're going to dock you one spot in the standings. They fell one spot. So with a team like Alabama, who they clearly favor over other teams, Alabama was, I believe, 5th in the AP poll when they come in at second in the first college football playoff ranking. That Alabama's going to beat Arkansas. Arkansas is not going to give them a test this weekend.
Right.
They're going to beat a bad Auburn team on the Plains the week after that. And then you have to think, is the committee really going to drop them 3 spots out of it? That's where I come in. I don't know what Alabama is. I don't know what – I think Georgia's going to win that game. I don't know by how much, but I just don't see them falling that far.
I just think it's the style of how they lose. If they lose in a close fashion, I think they do get that 4th spot. But I think if they get blown out, I think it will be hard to rationalize putting them in as well. Again,
I think that Georgia defense can hold Alabama. I just don't know if the Georgia offense is going to run all over the Alabama defense. You know, I don't know.
even the mailman.
No, if JT Daniels is playing, then Georgia, I think, they probably won't run away with it. I think they probably win by about 10. Just because I think Alabama's still that good. I mean, they still have the athletes. But with Stetson Bennett, I am on the edge of my seat the entire game.
I mean,
he's athletic, don't get me wrong, but horrifying.
The one thing that I think is hurting JT Daniels is he shaved that mustache. He looked like a silent film villain when he had that. Like, I thought he was tying a woman to railroad tracks when he had that. And he's got to be the oldest guy this side of France who has that big butt part of jet black hair. And so that worries me about JT Daniels. Where did the confidence go? He's confident to have that mustache.
Yeah, maybe the power of the mustache. I mean, he was very. I mean, I watched that Tennessee game. He just kind of seemed a little PO'd, I guess, to be correct. Stetson Bennett, some throws he was making, literally like a middle schooler could have made, and it was just like a dump pass on backfield and threw at his feet. And he was going to be running for 30 yards. Anyways, beside the fact. So I'm interested to hear y'all's upsets of the week. You want to go ahead and start with that, Caleb?
Yeah. I kind of had my eye on a couple. If I had to pick one right off the bat that I'm looking at and kind of trying to pull something, I try and pull something a little bit zany and wacky. I'm going to take Iowa State over Oklahoma. Like, Iowa State has consistently
giving them issues.
They've been consistently in good games. I mean, they only lose by 2 to 11 Baylor, who, like Michael said, though, Baylor probably doesn't really deserve to be in that spot where they were. But nonetheless, close games there. The West Virginia loss wasn't a good one, particularly. But then they go the next week and they blow out Texas. But then the week after, they lose by 3 to Texas Tech. So I'm going to take this is the week that, since they've been so up and down, I'm going to take this is the week they're putting it together and they actually beat a number 12 team.
I think that's good. I think this could be Matt Campbell's last game as last big game as an Iowa State head coach, but I think that they could pull it off. My upside pick for the week, I've got 2. I think I kind of mentioned earlier, I think SMU does beat Cincinnati. Cincinnati just looks so up and down all the last couple of weeks, mostly down, actually. I mean, the fact that we're still talking about Cincinnati is that they're thinking God right now that the Tulsa running back fumbled the ball on the goal line, because if not, they're completely out of the conversation and we aren't even talking about them for New Year's Six bowl, to be honest. So I think they do fall to SMU. SMU, I mean, as a UCF alum, they just beat the absolute crap out of us. We're not very good this year, but that was just a beatdown. That offense can get hot really fast. Obviously, Cincinnati has a better defense than UCF has, but they haven't looked good at all lately. So I'm thinking they fall. And then Another loss I see, I think Kansas State upsets Baylor. I think that you're going to have the typical pull off the big upset and then just fall, like come out slow. And of course, Baylor now kind of, I mean, if Oklahoma loses one more, then they're going to fall out of the conference championship. So Baylor's definitely playing for something, but I think that they could end up falling short and that you end up having a, it's going to kind of leave the door open for Oklahoma to make it back in.
It's a very hard place to play in Manhattan. I mean, just ask Oklahoma. I mean, they lost last year in Manhattan, and they lost 2 of the last 3 against K-State. So Kansas State's one of those teams, kind of like Iowa State reminds me, they can beat anyone in those. What do you think, Michael? What's your upset?
I've been waffling through a couple. One to keep an eye on is Nebraska against Wisconsin. Wisconsin's played really well. Probably the second best defense in the entire country behind Georgia. Nebraska has a better point differential in Big Ten play than Purdue does. And one game in the conference. So I think Nebraska keeps it close in these sort of big games. I think that's a potential one. I do think I love that Kansas State over Baylor pick. I really like that one as well. I think that one does come to fruition. But the one I am most confident on, the one that I am riding with, are the Utes, the Utah Utes with Oregon coming to town. As I mentioned, Oregon has been playing with fire in Pac-12 play, and I'm glad we were able to hammer them for that Stanford loss. I don't know what happened to Stanford. We just can't find nerds who can play football anymore. They've gone off an enormous cliff, and they, despite having the best win in the country on the road without Kayvon Thibodeau, they are a meh road team. They're dominant at home, but in the Mario Cristobal era, they're basically a 500, just above 500 road team. So playing in a hostile place to play in Salt Lake City, it's no bounce house. Don't get me wrong, I love the bounce house. Also the best nickname for a stadium in all of college football.
Yes, sir.
But they get rowdy out there. They get rowdy. Give me the Utes. Vegas has them by 3. I have them by more than 3. Buckle down. Going to be a lot of upsets. Utah will be one of them.
I think Utah gets it done either this week or in the conference championship game. I think they're definitely going to take down Oregon at least once.
Oregon runs the football really well, and they have Thibodeau, who's just a nightmare. They've got a lot of athletes all over the field. Of course, you're going to Cristobal's a lights-out recruiter. You got that Nike money. Who wouldn't want to play where a duck rides a motorcycle? I never learned about that in biology class, but if I did, I'd be going to school there. But I just don't see them going on the road and winning a critical late afternoon game in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, my main upset is also that Utah Oregon game, but I want to touch a little more on this Nebraska Wisconsin game. Yeah, Wisconsin does have one of the best defenses in the country, but Nebraska has been within 10 points of 3 of the top 10 teams. Well, Oklahoma got bounced, so 3 of the top 13 teams. Oklahoma, Michigan State, and Ohio State, they've been within 10 points. They've been in the game until late in the fourth quarter in all those games. Probably should have won at least 2 of those 3. I think Nebraska is going to beat Wisconsin and kind of throw more of a wrench into that Big Ten division that's already kind of lacking in Iowa and Wisconsin, who leads the way currently. But I think Nebraska's going to win that game. I mean, they're their best 3-7 team I've seen. It's really the best 3-7 team I've ever seen.
That's kind of why we kind of talked about it the last time we had our podcast, and it was right after Scott Frost got extended. And I was saying that I think it's a good idea. And that's coming from somebody that kind of was hoping he wouldn't succeed. I just think it was a good idea. I think that you see very slow growth in this team, but they've not lost by double digits all year.
That's
not many 3-7 teams like that.
Nebraska, I'm with you on extending Scott Frost. Scott Frost is so interesting because he played on both sides of the ball when he was a player, and he's coached on both sides of the ball. He was successful as an OC and an assistant at Oregon. And then you saw what he did taking over was UCF winless the year before he got there? Wasn't it an 0-20 year? And then he comes in and does Yemen's work there. Nebraska fans who want him fired need to forget about the 80s and 90s. It is difficult. They were living on recruiting players from Texas and California. And imagine you're a player who's an elite 4 or 5-star coming out of Miami. And you've lived your whole life in palm trees and beaches and beautiful women. And you're having Alabama come to your door. You're having Miami there. You're having Georgia there. And then you have Scott Frost coming in and say, hey, how'd you like to be really cold among a bunch of corn? Oh, have we won a lot of football games? No, we haven't. What do you say? It's hard to recruit there. There's no talent for miles and miles from campus.
Mm-hmm.
You get a big corn-fed boy who can play left tackle for you, but that's not enough. And Adrian Martinez he has to graduate eventually. And so you're going to get a new quarterback in there. That's a tough job. It's more of a rebuild than they were making it seem. They're making it seem like here's the keys to the car. Whoever takes over from Saban, here's the keys to the car. It drives fine. That's not what that situation is up there. But like you said, progress this year. They kept it close to Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State, and Oklahoma in a gauntlet. They've played good football. It just hasn't resulted in wins.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that they can't get over that hump, and hopefully with maturity and getting a 10th year senior out of their program may benefit them. He's like Hunter Renfrow. He's been there forever.
How old is this guy? It's like Jordan Bohannon, the basketball player at Iowa. He's in his, I think, 7th year of playing basketball there.
Yeah, exactly. It's just players that just can't seem to let go of college, I guess.
You got to feel weird at those bars, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's your major? I don't know. I have 3 degrees by now. What do you mean, what's my major? Maybe.
Sorry, what were you gonna say? For me, I think the best game is going to be Southern Methodist and Cincinnati. I really think that I'm not going to pick SMU to take the upset. Do I think Cincinnati will lose either to SMU or Houston? Yes. But I don't know. I think Desmond Ritter will probably have a late drive. He'll have to come up clutch to win the game. But I think that's going to be the best game. I think it's going to be a late 4th quarter, last drive kind of win for Cincinnati.
I'm weirdly looking forward to Illinois versus Iowa because it's just going to be that like northern ugly slugfest. I mean, I don't think Iowa's allowed to score more than 25 points in a game. I think there's some kind of rule that's against that. And Illinois is not allowed to win. So
13-10 will be the final score.
The hell of a defensive game, though,
In 8 overtimes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
What about you, Michael?
If I'm going for the most interesting tailgate, it's got to be BYU, Georgia Southern. I can't imagine coming all the way from Utah and being like, this is Statesboro, Georgia. That's got to be fascinating in and of itself. But it depends on if Brennan Armstrong will play. If Brennan Armstrong's playing, him versus Kenny Pickett, that's good football. I mean, Caleb, I love Kenny Pickett as an NFL quarterback. I am all aboard the Pickett train. I'm building the Pickett fence, whatever you want to say. I love watching him play. I love watching Pitt. Remember, they have Pat Narduzzi, the famed D coordinator of Michigan State, as their head coach, and yet they're an offensive juggernaut. I don't know how they lost to Western Michigan, but I love watching Pitt. If Brendan Armstrong doesn't play, then give me that Oklahoma-Iowa State game. Matt Campbell always plays it close. It seems like Matt Campbell may be finally taking some of those phone calls, answering a couple of them, so who knows how much longer he'll be in Ames. I think that'll be a fantastic game. You cannot convince me that someone won't have the ball going to tie it up or take the lead within 2 minutes, the final 2 minutes of the game. That's going to go right down to the wire. You can't.
I can definitely see Iowa State winning that game. And like you said, with Matt Campbell taking those phone calls, I mean, I think it's probably about time for him to get out. Because if you think about it, I mean, Breece Hall, his star running back, he hasn't had the best of years, and Purdy on their way out, Brock Purdy. They're both out after this year. So it's about time for him to head on.
Yeah. It's the end of a rebuild cycle. That's not just going to turn into another rebuild, I think. So
Yeah.
I mean, he's one of the Iowa State's one of the few programs in college football who doesn't really have an interest in paying college football players. They didn't do it under the table. One of the very few programs who wasn't doing that. And so now that NIL has taken that stuff out of the shadows into the forefront, I don't know. It's just gotten even harder to recruit there. So it's tough. Ames, fantastic college town, terrific fan base. Love Cyclone power, but it'll be tough.
It'll be rough. For me, my most interesting game, it's Wake Forest and Clemson. Like, I'm part of it's a selfish thing because in week 3, after Clemson just kept looking really bad, I predicted that no ACC team would end up ranked at the end of the year. So part of me is really pulling for Clemson here to beat Wake Forest pretty badly. And you're going to literally have Wake Forest and NC State at the very bottom of the top 25. So, but I just think that game could be really fun because is Wake Forest a legit top 15, top 10 team? I don't think so. But also Clemson's been the most disappointing team in the country this year. So I just think it's going to be kind of an interesting game. And what are we going to get, a slugfest? We're going to have a shootout because Wake Forest has played both of them this year and Clemson can't score. So
It's definitely going to be one or the other. It's not going to be just like a 30 to 28 game. It's going to be in the 50s or it's going to be in the teens. Probably more likely in the teens because it's Clemson. So.
Forest hasn't scored less than 35 points this year. That was Florida State.
Who'd have thought the ACC had the most fun quarterbacks this year, and one of them wouldn't be DJ Ukulele?
yeah. Well, I was not high on DJ very much at the beginning of the year. I was kind of had one of my friends get really pissed at me actually because I didn't like DJ, but didn't think it'd be this bad. But well, either way, last thing for the podcast. Coming into the last couple of weeks, the Heisman race is kind of breaking down to a few people. But I still don't think there's the exact obvious favorite. I'll start with you, Michael. Who's your number one favorite for the Heisman right now?
Well, I wish it was this fella right here. Oh, a couple 80-plus yard punts, 350-yard field goals this year. Perfect on extra points, but it won't be him. Matt Corral from my alma mater, Ole Miss, as I just throw my credibility at the window by revealing that's my alma mater. No one means more to their team, and he was on pace to be the runaway Heisman winner until all 3 receivers go down. His number 1 tight end went down, and he hurt his ankle at the end of that Tennessee game. Hasn't really put up numbers. I'd love to see him at least get an invite there, but I don't think you can give it to him at this point. I don't think you can give it to Stroud or Bryce Young. Stroud has the best receiving core in the entire country. Absolutely dynamic dudes. And he's been beating up on some of the worst Big Ten teams there. Bryce Young, I mean, they throw it a million times a game. Who would have thought you'd say that about a Saban team? I don't think Young's your Heisman winner, which leaves me with just Kenneth Walker. I mean, come on. He's probably behind Corral, the second most important player in the country to the team in the top 15 in the country. I mean, how much would Wake love to have him right now? Mother of God. But he saves his best for the big moments. That was a Heisman game against Michigan. And I can definitely see him against a suspect Ohio State defense having another big game again this week. If Michigan State wins it this week and he scores a couple touchdowns again, you got to give it to this guy. I know we don't want to give it to running backs anymore, but give it to a running back. Kenneth Walker, he's bonkers.
I agree that if they beat Ohio State this week, that he's going to win the Heisman. For me, I don't see that happening though, and I think that the voters are going to dock him, even though I think he's completely deserving of it. My Heisman favorite is actually C.J. Stroud because I think that you're going to see Ohio State get 3 huge wins at the end of the year. That'll kind of boost his candidacy. But also, I'm going to say another guy that's a dark horse. That Colton, go ahead and close your ears. Stetson Bennett's a dark horse. I mean, like,
what?
I don't think he's very good, but if you're leading the best team in the country at quarterback and you have some highlight plays, and if he can beat Alabama by a couple touchdowns, he's a dark horse.
Yeah, that's I thought you were gonna say Jordan Davis. I feel like
That'd be awesome.
that's more likely than Bennett. I mean, at the same time though, I have to agree with Michael, Kenneth Walker. I mean, he's been my Heisman front runner, like you said, ever since they beat Michigan, coming down from a few scores. I mean, he has 1,400 yards on the season. He's definitely one of the top backs in the country, and he's just dynamic. And I agree with Elijah as well. I think if Michigan State, I agree with also Michael. I think if Michigan State beats Ohio State, they're handing him the Heisman Trophy. But if he doesn't, then I think it could be Stroud. It could be, I would say Bryce Young, but I don't think they're going to beat Georgia necessarily. So I don't think you get it that way. But yeah, I'd say probably Kenneth Walker would be my lock, and then CJ Stroud's kind of number 2. What do you think, Caleb?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think it's pretty clear between those. It's kind of weird. It's going to come down. I feel like it could very well come down to kind of this game. Although, actually, I do disagree with Elijah. I don't think they're going to dock him if they lose because, I'm kind of a Michigan State fan myself too on the side, coming from that north kind of area. How much talent do they really have around Kenneth Walker aside from an offensive line that clearly knows how to block? But I mean, that's not a super talented team. I don't even know how far they are off from Nebraska. Not really all that far. They're not, especially in talent, maybe more so in like experience, because they got a lot of seniors on that team. But Kenneth Walker's pretty much single-handedly put that team on his back and just carried him. So I'm going to go Kenneth Walker 1, Stroud number 2, but I would put Ritter as a close number 3 behind Stroud, depending on how the season finishes up.
I like what you're saying about Kenneth. I wouldn't dock him myself if they lost because I get what you're saying. But I'm thinking from a Heisman voter standpoint.
What if they lose like 48-45 and he goes for like 250 and 3 touchdowns? How can you dock him, man?
Yeah, that's one thing. My worry is they're going to get beat by 2 or 3 touchdowns. They're a 19-point dog right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if that spread ends up working, I think that's too high of a spread myself. But if that spread works out, I see that they dock him because it's just.
I need to put some money on that because Michigan State's line that's a horrible line for a team that runs the ball so much better than Oregon did and who crushed them with running, and it's not really changed all season long.
Yeah. Well, great podcast, y'all. Thank you, Michael. Remember, listen to the Spaghetti Junction Boys podcast, and we'll see you next time, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.